Alphys couldn't have written all the entries in the True Lab. The idea that Alphys wrote every entry except the elusive entry 17 seems plausible. After all, many of the statements said in the entries were later confirmed by her, such as naming the human soul's power as determination. Despite her saying that, I go back to what Goner Kid said in Waterfall, a world where everything is the same, but you don't exist, where everything functions perfectly fine without you. Now this line doesn't have to be about Gaster. I could think of maybe one other character this line could apply to. But if we were to take their words literally, Alphys claiming that she was the one who named it determination would be a case of filling in the blanks. Like, of course she had to have named it that way, because there was no one else. But let's actually read entry 17 for a moment. It goes as follows. Monsters' physical forms can't handle determination like humans can. With too much determination, our bodies begin to break down, and everyone's melted together. Oh, wait a minute. This isn't the one. This is an unused entry 17 that was found in the game at some point, but was later removed. Let's get back to this one a little later. Now to the actual entry 17. Dark, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? The line, "this next experiment," implies that Gaster had worked on one prior. We know this is definitely Gaster, as entry 17 uses the Wingdings type font, and the ferryman claims to beware of the man who speaks in hands, meaning this entry is a spoken entry, not a written one, evident by the shaky text, which usually, but not always, indicates a strong emotion like fear or excitement. But this means that Gaster worked on an experiment prior. But what was it? Well, the entries tell us, specifically entry 1 through 8, 14, and 15. But how do we know these are Gaster's entries? I mean, they aren't written in all caps, whereas Gaster speaks, seemingly, in all uppercase Wingdings. Well, Sans and Papyrus are pretty consistent with how they type with the way they talk, being all lowercase and all uppercase respectively. However, Sans is a bit of an oddball, isn't he? As there are several instances in the game where he speaks with a normal type font, well, the default one anyways, to threaten the human, and even speaks normally, not all lowercase basically. And speaking of text, let's look at Alphys. Now the way she writes and speaks is pretty normal, only going all uppercase when showing excitement. However, this is how Toby Fox tricked you, because by this point you probably forgot how Alphys types. During Huntland, she'll send various status updates, and she never types properly here, either all lowercase or all uppercase to express herself. Now if we look at entries 9 through 13, 16, and 18 to 21, these entries are typed the same way Alphys types her status updates. Plus, the mention of Metaton in entry 11 prove this has to be her. This means the entries that are written normally are definitely Gaster's. After all, the Gaster followers say that Alphys followed up Gaster, so there couldn't have been anyone else writing these entries. Still not convinced? Well, let's look at entry 8, where it mentions the Queen. There's no way this could have been written by Alphys, because she doesn't know about the Queen until the end of the Pacifist route. Now you might argue that Alphys should know that there is a Queen. I mean, after all, if there's a king, why not a Queen? Well, entry 4's author mentions finding tapes that Asgore hasn't seen, but we can view them in the True Lab. And these tapes have Toriel in them. You can hear her voice despite not being able to see anything. And considering the author of entry 4 says Asgore shouldn't see these, implies that they have seen what's inside of those tapes. And if it was Alphys who watched all of those tapes, then why didn't Alphys make any comment about Toriel's voice sounding familiar? Still not convinced? Okay, well what about entry 2? The barrier is locked by soul power. Unfortunately, this power cannot be recreated artificially. Soul power can only be derived from what was once living. So, to create more, we will have to use what we have now, the souls of monsters. The author speaks of only having monster souls, not human souls. We know Toriel took the human's body to the ruins along with their soul, which is where we start in the beginning of Undertale. Considering this event had to happen over a century ago, the fact the author only has monster souls at this point means the writer would have to be very, very old, and Alphys grew up with Caddy and Bratty, and as far as we're aware, she isn't a boss monster like Asgore or Toriel, so there's no way this could be her. But at this point, you're probably thinking of ways these entries could have been by Alphys, but there's one entry that definitely proves Alphys couldn't have written any of these entries, especially entry 8. So let's actually take a moment and read what it says. I've chosen a candidate. I haven't told Asgore yet. because I want to surprise him with it. In the center of his garden, there's something special. The first golden flower that grew before all the others. The flower from the outside world. It appeared just before the queen left. I wonder, what happens when something without a soul gains the will to live? Did you notice it? It's not the mention of the queen you should be looking at. It's the timeline given in the entry. The line, "It appeared just before the queen left," is a timeline of events. A timeline Alphys couldn't have given. Otherwise, she would have seen the queen and known when she left in relation to when the golden flower first appeared. So even if you somehow disagree with the notion that Gaster wrote a good number of these entries, Entry 8 by itself shows Alphys couldn't have written all of the entries. Now, before we continue, I do believe that Toby Fox at one point intended Alphys to be the writer of every entry. Why else cut out the original Entry 17? I believe, at some point in development, Toby Fox finally knew what he wanted to do with Gaster. After all, in the Undertale Kickstarter demo, you can use Gaster's name no problem. Thus, armed with the knowledge of what he wanted to achieve with Gaster, he likely changed elements of the story to imply Gaster's existence in the world, even without the use of fun values, so that way these elements in Deltarune would make sense when the time comes. It would also explain why Entry 17 is the odd one out. Timeline-wise, it has to happen after Entry 15, but I guess Toby Fox felt that Entry 16 was more important, since Alphys explains to us what basically happens to the amalgams, and probably felt that Entry 17 wasn't necessary. Or maybe the number 17 just has some importance to Gaster. I mean, he's usually associated with the number 6, but who knows, maybe 17 is just one of his special numbers. But now that we know which entries are Gaster's, let's look at the story they tell. It's clear Gaster was doing the same experiment Alphys would later try to recreate. At some point, Gaster gave up. While he did resurrect monsters, which he seems to see as a good thing. How odd he would put a little smiley face. Maybe he did go mad, but at some point he might have also been kind. Maybe he still is. It's hard to really say. Regardless, after this failure of an experiment, since he didn't really achieve anything in terms of opening the barrier, he would later go on to work on the next experiment in Entry 17, which many, including myself, believe to be a dark fountain. But do we have proof that his determination experiment was at all successful at bringing back monsters? Well, Flowey does give us a timeline. He seemingly came into this world pretty recently, at least after the 6 human souls were captured. And yet, Gaster's entries imply that he used a golden flower. Well, one thing to take note of is said flowers, or the lack of a certain type of flower, those being the buttercup flowers, which we know were the cause of Asgore being sick and the death of the first human. Yet, we see plenty of golden flowers, which is quite odd. Even if Asriel had some seeds with him when returning to the underground, the amount of golden flowers seems ridiculous, almost like it became a parasite of some kind. But there's also Dog Amy and Dog Ressa. They say they were the number 2 nose-nuzzling champs of 98, and in New Home, we see that Asgore has a trophy for that competition of the same year. So for the dogs to have been second, and remember that, means they would have to be absurdly old. And the line, "of course we'd lose," is pretty interesting. Gerson comments that Toriel and Asgore were inseparable, grossly so. So, if that was the case, then of course they'd know they would lose. But there's also the credits. In Undertale's credits, there are a few monsters with a question mark. These being Giftrot, Dog Amy and Dog Ressa, and the Amalgams. Now in Giftrot's case, this was because Toby didn't really design that monster, he just sort of gave a little additions, but for the dog couple and the amalgams, they are credited being made by Toby Fox in the art book, which is interesting, because in the game, they have question marks. So why do they have question marks? Well, I believe this is for in-game interference. We know that Alphys made the amalgams, but then, why would the dog couple also have a question mark? Unless their existence was in some way, interfered by someone else. And sure, they may not look old, but they are. And there's no way for them to be so old unless their existence is odd by itself, likely due to some form of determination. There's also Gerson, and all I'll say about him is, it's pretty interesting that he's still alive in Undertale, but not in Deltarune. How strange. In conclusion, Alphys didn't write all the entries, but I don't think this takes away from her character at all. She's always been someone who's following up someone else's footsteps, but she can't manage to keep up without stumbling, something her Deltarune counterpart clearly shares, since she's following up Gerson. Alphys is smart, there's no doubt about that, but these situations are way above her pay grade, and she knows that. but still tries anyways. And I think that's both a remarkable quality and a burden. One she frees herself from by the end of the pacifist route. She is strong, she just doesn't know it herself yet. She just needs to be pushed in the right direction. But with that being said, this is my proof as to why I believe that Alphys didn't write every entry in the True Lab. But if you're interested in more Deltarune and Undertale theories by me, then click on the playlist and subscribe. I'd love to have you around, and please, comment. I do try to read every single comment, so let me know your thoughts. And as always, take care of yourselves. Peace.